Alright everybody, it is time for me to review the Star Trek Prodigy video game, Supernova. What? Oh, we're reviewing the episode Supernova. What? Why would they do that? Hello interwebs, I hope you are all doing well, and I am here to review the penultimate episode of Star Trek Prodigy Season 1, this time episode 19, Supernova Part 1. And yeah, just have to say this up front, it is a little bit weird that earlier this year they released a Star Trek Prodigy video game called Supernova, and the plot, other than it being Star Trek Prodigy, has nothing to do with these two episodes of Star Trek Prodigy, also called Supernova. Like, if these were episodes that had, like, come out, like, 2 or 3 years down the line, I'd be like, okay, that makes sense, that, or I can forgive that, but, like, 2 things in the same year with the same name is a bit weird, no? It seems like someone missed a communication, missed a hail there, which is certainly something that I wish some people in this episode had done. See, I'm transitioning. These are transitions. It's what I'm good at. I'm a trans person. Anywho, let's get into my spoiler-free thoughts on this episode. Overall, this was a fantastic penultimate episode of the season. It pretty much just really set the stakes in a way that I think appropriately builds off of everything that has been going on this season. And honestly feels really, really earned. One of my big problems with other Star Trek series that are going on right now, particularly Star Trek Discovery and Picard, though more so Picard than Discovery, though Discovery has this problem as well, is that they do also have these sort of like big stakes, end of the universe, end of Federation, end of Starfleet sort of things at the end of each of their seasons. But when it gets there, they feel so over the top, they feel so heightened, and they feel so, like, just needing to get to, like, this number, like, turn it up to 11 style thing on the storyline, that it doesn't really, I'm not able to connect with it in any way. But here in Prodigy, in these penultimate episodes, without getting too much into spoilers, things got heated, things escalated very, 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 very far, but because of how it's been built all season, and it's always kept a focus on the characters that we've been worrying about and their emotional struggle, rather than like, oh my god, the world's gonna end all the time. Like, it doesn't stay there. It focuses in on how our characters feel and are trying to interact with it, and how it makes them experience this situation, that it really just pays it off and really makes me feel the tension in these final scenes. Now, would I have possibly preferred a story season ender that didn't end on like, the universe is ending sort of thing? Yeah, possibly. But that being said, if they were going to do it, this is the best version of it that I have seen modern Star Trek do, or really any Star Trek do. And I think I'm just very pumped and excited going into the finale of this season based off of what they've been set up here. And there's some surprise. This is not just all setup episode. Like, shit goes down in this episode, and it was just really exciting to see. And that's sometimes the problem with a penultimate episode of a season, that it's just like all set up. But no, this is really just like getting some exciting stuff here. That all being said, I need to get into spoilers to talk about it. So if you have not seen the episode, jump off here, and we're going to talk spoilers now. So we begin our episode right where we left this episode, with the Protostar crew facing a Starfleet armada, but Janeway back in her own body, but in the brig. And I actually really, really loved this opening because in body swap episodes like we had last episode, there's a tendency to just be like, oh yeah, the body swap happened and now everyone's back to normal. We're just trying to forget the consequences of that or anything like that. But here, like, the fact that Janeway was acting weird means that she's still in the brig, and people don't entirely trust her judgment at the moment, which I thought is great. I liked seeing consequences for that body swap instead of it just being a silly thing that happened. And I also really love that Janeway is able to talk her way out of the brig because of a connection to Star Trek Voyager. And you know, some people might say, oh, this is a bit of fan service that Janeway was able to talk to this ensign who is one of the I believe they're called the Barzans, the alien species from the episode Counterpoint. If you don't remember that episode, it's the one where Janeway had a little bit of a romance with a space Nazi, as you do sometimes. It happens. Actually, it's a good episode. It's actually one of my favorite episodes of Star Trek Voyager, if we're being honest. But some people might consider that like fan service. But I liked it because it felt earned in a sense that, like, an action that Janeway did in the past had consequences in the present, and makes sense because they went through a wormhole that this ensign might have ended up near the Federation. And so I like that it's not just like, hey, look at that, like, cool thing from Starfleet past. It's a, thing that is an action that a character took has consequences later on, and it makes the show feel connected to the larger Star Trek universe, specifically Voyager, and also makes us want to go back and like watch that episode and be like, oh, I know where this is going to connect, and it's actually going to cause Janeway to like help save the Federation later on. I honestly thought it was just a really cool connection, and for kids who don't know the connection, they'll now want to be excited to go back and watch that episode of Star Trek Voyager, which is a good episode of Star Trek Voyager to watch. Space Nazi romances aside. Actually, it's a romance of the week that works in that episode. Anyways, I'm not reviewing Counterpoint. It's a good episode. But then I like the crew of the Protostar all working together like a well-oiled machine in order to try to stop this fleet from hailing them and talking to them. It was just nice to see the evolution of this crew from where they were at the beginning of the season, where they weren't able to work together, to now to the point where they are able to work together really, really well. It was just a nice subtle thing and a nice payoff for all of the buildup that we've seen throughout the season. I also love seeing so many sexy starships here. Like, we got a Defiant class, we got Sovereign classes, we have a bunch of like Nebula classes. Like, there's so many sexy starships here. If you're a starship freak, then you're enjoying yourself this episode. Moving on from there, though, I understood why the characters didn't tell Dal that he wouldn't be able to join Starfleet because he's an augment, which is a beat that I forgot to mention last episode of my review. It made sense that, like, they're in the heat of moment, you don't want to distract him, but I did like that immediately after that, when they did have a few moments and Dal and Gwen were off doing the next thing, that Gwen does immediately tell Dal, because he deserves to know that even in this situation, they're not going to let him in because they have a prejudice against augments. And I like that this is, like, the prejudice that we're actually seeing being built out throughout, like, a lot of Star Trek stuff. It's like come up in Strange New Worlds as well with Una over on that show, and so it's an interesting sort of stigma to draw into with Starfleet, that they still have that. It works much better than like the synthetic band did in Star Trek Picard. So I like that she didn't hide it for too long. She didn't distract him in the moment where like he needed to be focused, but as soon as they had a chance after that, she did tell him. I thought that was great. The one thing that I did not like was the fact that before that moment, when Dal and Gwen are looking into each other's eyes, Dal kisses Gwen. The reason I dislike that is I really dislike that trope of boys, especially boys, but boys and girls, really, is in kids media, just kissing each other without asking first. And I get to a degree that there is... kids don't completely understand the rules of consent and things like that, and it is awkward and strange, especially the first time. But there is a problem with depicting in kids media that boys can just kiss a girl and that's okay. And especially since it was like kind of moved past and seen as all right. It's a messy thing. Like, I'm not saying like, oh, the show is saying breaking consent of a woman is okay. Like, that's not what Prodigy is doing. But it is a trope that sort of leans into that idea that like it's okay to kiss a girl if you're sort of like feeling the moment. And I would have much rathered it been like an awkward moment of Dal being like, can I kiss you? And she's saying like, what? No, I have something else completely to say to you. Like, it would have gotten across the same idea without like Dal breaching Gwen's consent, which I think is, again, not the show like saying horrible things, but sort of leaning into that side of things, like that, you know, breaking a girl's, personal boundaries without asking is all right. And I would have much rathered a Star Trek show, especially in this modern era, depict something that is, I think, a bit more, healthy, I guess would probably be the best way to do it. Again, I'm harping on it a little bit too much. It is a trope that is just ubiquitous in media, not Star Trek Prodigy specifically, but it's one that I rub up against for just, I think you can have a chance to, in a kid's show, depict things like that in a much more nuanced way that doesn't lean into problematic tropes. And I'll leave it there. Moving on, though, I like that our villains jump over to the Protostar. We have the Diviner, we have the Vindicator, and the new Deadlock, I forget his name. But they all beam over and start battling our crew and fighting, and all of these battles were really cool. Like the gravity bomb, Dreadnought sort of being like the spidery thing, all was really fun. The battle going on there, and Gwen facing off against the Vindicator while the Diviner was sort of separated from them was great. I will say, the crew really needs to stop allowing Hollow Janeway to be turned off. Like, that happens constantly, and it's a problem. But I like, at the end of all of this, the Diviner sacrifices himself to save Gwen, and it pays pays off his arc of like becoming more empathetic and also him caring for Gwen over his goal. I mean, if you go back to the beginning of the series, like episode 2 or 3, the Diviner gave up Gwen to go after the Protostar, and this is his arc coming full circle in this moment, that he learns that he cares more for Gwen than he does his, like, you know, genocidal mission. And so I thought that was nice, and then he dies giving her the affirmation that she has kind of been seeking from him. So I thought that was a really sweet payoff. I wasn't like emotionally crying over it like I would at some other deaths in other shows, but I thought it was a really effective end to his character. And since we're dealing with timey-wimey stuff, I'm sure we'll get John Noble back at some point in some way. I'd be curious to see how that goes, because I'd be sad if we lost John Noble, because I love John Noble. He's great. But this does lead to the Vindicator hailing Starfleet ships and then escaping, meaning that the Starfleet ships are now infected with the construct, and they start affecting each other. And this is what I was talking about, where it feels like these like Starfleet ending stakes that we see in this episode are actually earned. And when I see the ships like battling each other, I'm like, oh crap, this is really scary. Like, this is like something I could see being the end of Starfleet as we know it. Like, it pays off the weight of it up very appropriately. And I like seeing how it affects, like, the universal translators. I think that was really cool that they were unable to translate and work with each other because they weren't able to communicate with each other. It reminds us of Tars Lamora and how, you know, people are separated by their inability to communicate with each other. And I like that Gwen is actually the one that knows how to translate. She can speak all these languages, kind of like Saru in Star Trek Discovery in Season 2, where a similar thing happened. And so I like that she was able to communicate with everyone. She was able to bridge that gap. And then they come up with the idea of reaching out to the Federation's allies to try to help, and they contact the Klingons. And initially, I sort of, when I first heard the speech that Gwen gives, I initially sort of thought, like, I don't know if that would work, because she's sort of saying, well, the Federation is this idea of people coming together and unifying. And I'm like, I don't know if the Klingons would really care about that, like, that they would care about this, like, unifying idea of the Federation. Like, they certainly are allies of the Federation, but I don't know if they necessarily believe in the same ideals. But the reason that it ultimately does come around to work for me is because the Klingons would join in and help, because they see, you know, the Federation as their brother, their allies, and so they would come out of a sense of honor. So I don't really know, like, Gwen's speech works thematically in the series for me. I don't know if it necessarily worked as a persuasive argument to the Klingons specifically, but I do see it working overall because of the sense of honor that the Klingons have. And then we also see things like the Federation, or the Vulcan ships, and Ferengi ships, which is, don't know if I buy that one completely, but maybe he was a nice little caring Ferengi trader. He's like, I want to save my customers, you know, if your customer's all dead, I can't sell things, so maybe it makes sense to me. But it was a sweet moment thematically, if not necessarily effectively, like, earned story-wise, but makes sense, at least enough. But then, you know, more Starfleet ships start going up, and the stakes are set where, like, there's nothing they can do to stop this from growing. So has me set off for the finale, being very excited to see how they're going to tie this all off together, because I buy the stakes. I'm really scared. I'm like, oh my god, I believe that this terrible things could happen, and we know that things will be fine, but I think they've earned these stakes really, really well. So that's my thoughts on Supernova Part 1. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below, but beyond all of that, thank you so much for watching. I hope you all, until next week, my friends, live long and prosper.